Okay. Rex Bolt again. This is a preview of my time travel series, the first book, Time Control. And I'm putting Time Control in audio installments on YouTube. Nothing fancy, just me reading it, making a few mistakes, etc. Nothing professional, but I thought it'd be fun to do that. So they're essentially going to be 1 hour installments. I've got the first one on there. I think it's the prologue chapter through chapter 9. And I don't know how many more there will be. It's not a real long book, but anyway, that's it. It'll be listenable if anybody wants to listen to it. I enjoyed writing this time travel series. It's something a little different. I kind of got the idea from Stephen King when I read his book 11/22/63. And that wasn't bad. It was a little too long, in my opinion. But the premise was good. That some guy in Maine, I believe, a high school teacher, is teaching a night class. And anyway, somebody he gives an assignment, and one of the people writes, I think the assignment is describe the worst day of your life. And one of the people, I think is maybe the custodian at the school, an old guy, but he writes a terrible thing happened on one day of his life. And then the main character starts thinking about it, and he starts thinking, geez, that's tough. I'm sorry to hear that. He's a nice guy, and wow, I had no idea he had that history. And then he somehow finds out that in the local diner, there's a way in the basement to go into a portal, and somebody had talked about the ability to time travel back to 1963 specifically. And so, yeah, you have to suspend disbelief, obviously. But once you do that, there's not much else in that book that's supernatural or anything else. Once you buy into the fact that the guy can time travel, that's possible, there doesn't have many of the other Stephen King elements which, can be way out there. It's a pretty straightforward story beyond that. But bottom line is he tries to go back and stop this event from happening to this student when he was a young guy. And there's some, mixed results, etc. I can't really remember what happened with that. But the bottom line is then he realized, 1963, I can go back. I can stop the Kennedy assassination maybe, because that was in November of 1963. That was, a lot of people, probably myself included, that was one of the biggest events in your life, one of the most memorable events. I remember where I was. I was at a 50th elementary school reunion not too long ago over the summer, and everybody remembered that very clear-eyed, that moment when it was announced. We were in the yard, and it was announced what happened, and we went down to the lunchroom, and it's very clear, crystal clear as a bell, more than 50 years ago. That was actually 55 years ago. But it's obviously a very significant event, and still not necessarily solved. But King's thought is Oswald was the lone killer, and his thing is he's going to go back, figure it out, and stop Oswald. Just stop the guy from going to the book depository that day and firing, a weapon. And so he moves basically to Texas, and it drags a little bit because he gets there early, and then he becomes a school teacher in a small town in Texas. He just kind of threw that in, and there's months go by, and he's trying to study Oswald's moves and trying to figure it out. But that got a little lengthy and probably didn't have quite enough to do with the real story. But the concept was interesting, and so I thought, this would be kind of fun. And I combined a couple things I enjoy. I enjoy high school, writing about high school, and I enjoy small towns. I grew up in a big city, and in high school, probably like a lot of people, I'm probably not alone, but yeah, you want to straighten things out sometimes, at least fictitiously. High school never works out perfectly when you're in high school. It's an awkward time. There's a lot of things swirling around. It's also a very exciting time, but it never is perfect. And so, you sort of want to go back when you become a novelist and maybe in your own little world that you create, maybe make it a little bit better. And this might not be better, actually. But I've got a guy, kind of an all-American kid, just normal, relatively popular kid, small town, Central Valley, California. And he develops in a football game. He's just an average player. He's a senior, year player at his school, and he's sort of in there starting because there's nobody better. He admits he's not the greatest. He's not a real heavy guy, not real strong, but he ends up in a game, a Friday night game, tackling a couple of players, and first one he kind of knocks out, just shockingly. In the second one, he ends up, sending to the hospital overnight with a brutal tackle. And people are congratulating him. Wow, you're playing hard. You've come a long way. But he's scared to death because he feels like something has changed. Like he has this super strength. And so he does a couple experiments and kind of confirms it. And he's scared to death because he thinks something might be mutating. There's nothing that he's going to celebrate. Something might be mutating in him, and it may continue, and he may perish. Something bad may happen. But so he's wrestling with that, and then he sort of figures out, he doesn't want to figure any of these things out, but he runs into a couple people. It's without getting too many details. A couple people around the country have had a similar experience. Sort of just out of the blue, developed this uncanny strength. And one of them then, he hears from the guy's brother a story that guy time traveled briefly. He went back a year in time. And he can't really confirm it, but now he's questioning, oh my God, do I have the ability to do something like that too, etc. So he doesn't want any of these things. He doesn't want to be super strong. He doesn't want to be able to time travel, but there's an incident that happens in his town, a tragedy, basically, and he takes it upon himself. He thinks, geez, if I really could time travel, maybe I can go back and alter that. A drunk driver runs up onto a curb and runs somebody over walking a dog, and who he knows, etc. And he thinks, gee, if I could just straighten that out, keep the person from walking the dog at that hour, or somehow, restrain the drunk driver, do something to alter that. And he feels this moral obligation to try it. So he investigates it, and sort of the story goes from there. And he doesn't want to be a superhero. He just wants to be a regular kid, finish off his senior year with no drama and girlfriends and sports and having fun and going to some parties and just being a regular kid. But he can't do it now. He's saddled with this kind of power. And so it was kind of fun to write. It's also hard to write this type of thing because you get confused yourself as the author. And you got to keep things straight every step of the way. For instance, if somebody goes back in time and changes even one little thing, like just takes a sign off, the football field, lays it on the grass, something like that may trigger a chain of events. Obviously, the more major change you make, the more major chain of events you're going to trigger in this fictitious world. But even a small change is going to change something else. You may come back and then you may move a sign, and then you come back and then all of a sudden your best friend is driving a different car and maybe has a different girlfriend and is looking at you crazy when you don't understand that, because you're in a different dimension now when you've come back, supposedly. So it's tricky as a writer to keep that stuff straight. That's why I didn't write a book 4, honestly. I did 3. Each one had its own situation, own kind of main situation, which I tried to resolve. But there were a lot of loose ends, and that's, of course, what you want in a series. There's plenty of room to keep going. But I think I got most of the time travel details pretty right. I mean, I've heard from a lot of readers, and only one reader, the guy enjoyed the series. He started off, he really enjoyed the 3 books. He says, but I got to bring something to your attention. If he grabbed money off his dad's bureau in 2017 and went back to the 1980s or whatever, 90s, and he uses that money. He's using that money to stay in motels and take care of business and eat and all that stuff. People would notice that the bills were different, that the bills just were designed a little different, and then, not to mention the serial numbers, but even just the look of the bills was probably different enough that he would have gotten, that wouldn't have worked. So, but I figured he's probably right. But if that's the worst thing somebody comes up with, then I'm doing okay. I'm sure there are worse things that I screwed up in there. But anyway, that was it. It was a struggle to write these, but it was also a lot of fun. I liked the character, and so we'll see what happens. But for now, I'm just putting them on as an audio book, and maybe as I read these, as I kind of produce these audiobooks, maybe I'll get inspired to try to write a book 4. Because it ends up he's left off kind of in a situation. He's resolved an important thing, of course, but he's still in a situation where there's a lot that it kind of feels like it's still dangling out there for him and also for some of the other characters. So it might be fun. Might be fun to give that a try. I've also noticed, as far as readers gobble this stuff up more than they do my other series, which I feel a little prouder of, which is the Vigilante Justice series. I've got 8 books in that. And, but I realize the problem with that is you've got to be a specific reader. You have to buy in to a sympathetic character who's a vigilante, essentially a vigilante killer, and might be a psychopath or sociopath, to some degree. And he has to be sympathetic, and there's certain percentage of the audience is not going to find that guy sympathetic no matter what. And so that's just the way it goes. But I notice with Pike, Gillette, the time travel, I do see people just gobbling them up on a weekend where they'll just read all 3. And they read the first and they want to find out what happens, and they keep going. And then they ask me where the 4th book is. And that's kind of like, an episodic TV series that grabs somebody and they'll binge watch sometimes if the whole season is taking place and they haven't seen any of it. They'll just binge watch the whole series on a weekend or in a week. That's what you want them to do. They don't do that as much with my Vigilante series. A few people do, and there are definitely a handful of readers that have gotten in touch with me on that one, that are right on my page with that, and they'll email, when's the next book, and go Chris. Chris is the main character, and they're rooting for him, etc. He's basically a killer, but although he means well, he's trying to clean up the world of bad stuff. But go Chris, I can't wait, etc. But I think a higher percentage of readers of this little time travel series, they really plunge in. So I don't know if that's good or bad, because I'm trying to write book 9 of the Vigilante Justice series, and we'll see how that works out. Okay. Thanks for tuning in.